Hey everyone, that's a nice little jingles from my friend Mark Tetro. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And I'm excited to have Tamara Lorincz, one of the most dynamic anti-war activists in the country to delve into the NATO that just happened last week. But before getting to our discussion with Tamara, I thought I would just start off with a few kind of tidbits about what's gone on in Canadian foreign policy over the past few days. One thing that some people may have seen was that a couple of days ago, the Congolese government buried the tooth of Patrice Lumumba. All that's left of Patrice Lumumba, who is Congo's independence leader, is the tooth, because his body was dissolved in acid. And recently, the Belgian government returned Lumumba's tooth, and on Congo's Independence Day, they decided to bury the tooth a few days ago. And Patrice Lumumba's assassination is something that Canada was directly complicit in. And Lumumba lasted for 3 months. He was pushing for a real decolonization. The Belgians wanted a decolonization that left them with control over Congo's vast mineral resources. And after the Americans and the Belgians, Canada really was the third player in the demise of Lumumba. Canadian UN mission that helped undermine Lumumba. This was all pretty understood at the time, that the Canadian officials were very much supporting the UN mission, which was working to undermine Lumumba. And then the Canadian military officer in charge actually boasted decades later that it was him that sent Joseph Mobutu, the head of the military at that time, to recapture Lumumba after he'd escaped house arrest. And then that leads to the process in which Lumumba is assassinated. So, of course, in any of this story, most of the Canadian media ignored this story about Lumumba's tooth being buried, of course, but any media did cover it, left out the Canadian angle. But it really is quite an extensive and well documented. The internal files have showed really clearly that Canada was working against Lumumba. So that's an important piece of foreign policy history that's overlooked. Another piece of current and more recent Canadian foreign policy history, and I mentioned, I believe last week, about what's going on in Libya, but the situation in Libya, there's been a number of developments. On Friday, the protesters stormed the parliament in the eastern city of Tobruk. So they're protesting the fact there haven't been elections in 11 years since Gaddafi was ousted, since the NATO war. And there was also a UN report that just came out just yesterday, I believe, and some of the stories are from today, that details all these mass graves in a suburb of Tripoli, and that were thought to have been created between 2016 and 2020. And it's not clear exactly how many, but hundreds and hundreds of people that were killed. And so here we have a situation where, what we were supposed to be doing in 2011 was bringing democracy and bringing, human rights. 11 years later, there haven't been elections. The country's still divided, and the human rights situation continues to be terrible. So this is some history. Again, Canada led the NATO mission that bombed Libya in 2011. So this is stuff that gets forgotten. All the parties, with the exception of one vote from Elizabeth May, all the parties backed Canada going to war, bombing Libya. Last Tuesday, Chrystia Freeland found out that Chrystia Freeland was speaking in Montreal, and a handful of us went down. We found out she's supposed to speak at 2:00 at the Old Brewery Mission. Went down to try to ask her some tough questions. Weirdly, it didn't. It's not exactly clear what happened, but she just never showed, or there's some sort of miscommunication in the press release. It's not exactly clear what happened. Anyways, later on, she was speaking at a second event at the Maison du Développement Durable. Happened to be doing this thing about 30 minutes before our anti-NATO rally that was planned. And we found out, they don't tell you where she's speaking in the press release for this thing at 5:00, but it was quite a big announcement. There was one other federal minister and 2 provincial ministers that were at this. So we got in touch with the press people to find out where it was, and they were obliged to tell it where it was. And it was actually quite easy to enter the room. Bianca Mageni, the director of Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, got on the press list and entered the room. And a number of others of us stayed outside, and Bianca asked a number of tough questions of Chrystia Freeland.
To fight Russia and Ukraine? Did you send, Mr. Freeland, did you send troops to fight Russia and Ukraine? Did you send troops to fight Russia and Ukraine? Are you not worried about the possibility of nuclear war? Did you send troops to fight? Is Canada at war with Russia? Did you send? Is Canada at war with Russia and Ukraine? Do you believe that NATO? Are you not worried aggressive alliance of nuclear war? Did you send troops to fight? Is Canada at war with Russia? Did you send? Is Canada at war with Russia and Ukraine? Do you believe that NATO? Are you not worried aggressive alliance?
So in that, there was, I think, a couple of versions of being played there. So it made it even more, a little bit more chaotic than it actually was. Though it was a little bit chaotic in the room. But we were able to make everyone in the room know that there was criticism of Canada's policy on towards Russia, and question whether Canadian special forces were operating in Russia. And we ultimately got asked to leave the room, or kind of pushed out of the room. But La Presse journalist that was there did a very good story where he pressed Freeland afterwards on the question of the New York Times report about Canadian special forces operating in Ukraine, and it was quite a good article. And there was also a Presse Canadienne article done of the disruption, the interruption, and then afterwards there was a pre-planned rally at a couple blocks away against NATO. And it was about 50 people that showed up to that rally. So it was definitely, and in social media, the videos of the disruption got quite a bit of circulation on Twitter and Facebook. Actually, on Wednesday, the next day, the Journal de Montréal had a story titled "Ukraine, nous sommes en guerre avec la Russie." So Ukraine, we're at war with Russia, and that's the widest circulating paper in Quebec. So there's some admission within the corporate media that about what's going on, the extent to which Canada is involved. Another issue, switching gears a little bit, Melissa Latzman, who's a conservative, strident apologist for apartheid, Toronto area MP, she posted to Twitter an attack against a rally on Canada Day. And she posted some video where all you hear people saying is free, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, free, free Palestine. But she tweeted out saying, quote, protesters screaming free Palestine, yelling anti-Semitic slurs and intimidating Jews in Thornhill outside a plaza of mainly kosher establishments. This is not anti-Zionism. It's a blatant act of anti-Semitic hate, which must be condemned by everyone. It's a little bit unclear about the full picture of what happened, but this is one more time when apologists for Israel is very aggressively besmirching people standing in solidarity with Palestine. And it appears what actually happened was the head of the Jewish Defense League, former head of the Jewish Defense League, because I understand Jewish Defense League has disbanded, but Mayor Weinstein had actually called for a protest against a Muslim convention taking place over the weekend in Toronto. And so there was going to be a counter protest to this protest against by Mayor Weinstein. And it's not exactly clear all the details. There's a Jerusalem Post article that's substantially more kind of both sides than what Melissa Latzman tweeted out. But eventually there ended up being a rally in front of a store called the Taste of Israel. And so Latzman is basically saying, because there was some, I don't know if they're kosher or Jewish, or in this case, one Taste of Israel, a store, that this was like an attack against Toronto Jews. And her post got wide circulation. And it's really, I mean, there were tons of rallies in front of LCBOs opposing South Africa wines in the 1980s. And the fact that in 2022, where all of the mainstream establishment human rights groups have all labeled Israel an apartheid state, the fact that someone like that can claim that those who are standing up for Palestinians are the real racists, and not those who were defending the apartheid, is just beyond belief, right? Just imagine in 1980s, and the claim was it's those who are calling for a boycott of South African wines that they're the real racists. But that's the reality, and it's a reality that unfortunately, if we're going to turn the tide in this country on Canada's support for Palestinian dispossession, we have to confront. We can't back down from. It's unpleasant, quite frankly, for the most part, to get involved in these kind of situations where the smears are coming heavy, and where there's all kinds of claims made, and you don't know exactly for sure if maybe something was said that was not perfect, or this or that. But the reality is that you have to stand up to this stuff. And to my mind, when there's accusations of anti-Semitism that are connected to Palestine, the burden of proof has to be so overwhelming on the side of those making the accusations, right? Because there's been so many lies, there's been so many distortions, there's so many people who genuinely believe that just by saying, free Palestine, that you are engaged in active anti-Semitism. Some people really do believe that, as crazy as it might sound. So it's an ongoing theme, I think, in certainly a theme that I consider important in terms of an important element of an injustice in Canadian foreign policy. Now, another theme, another issue that's been a little bit in the news, it deserves a little bit of attention, is the beginning of the RIMPAC exercises in the Pacific. And this is a US-led military exercise, something like 25,000 troops. I think it starts from around Honolulu in Hawaii. And Canada has dispatched 2 naval vessels to the RIMPAC exercise. And it's part of this strategy of militarizing the region, obviously with China primarily in mind. It's part of also last month, about 3 weeks ago or so, Foreign Minister Joly announced an Indo-Pacific Advisory Committee there was a good article in Canadian Dimension a couple of days ago about the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, these real like militaristic, neoconservative think tanks pushing Canada to establish an Indo-Pacific strategy, right? And this is really this sort of belligerent. We need to have more military presence in the region, and it's something that we need to push back against. I mean, what we're seeing with this NATO summit, and I think Tamara will get into it more. We're seeing NATO is openly viewing China as a threat, listing China as a threat. And it's crazy, but they're looking there's factions of the Washington establishment who want to basically be at war with Russia and China at the same time, and obviously that's horrific in a direct sense. Of obviously people in Ukraine are, it's horrific for those who are on the primary victims, but it's also a catastrophe with regards to dealing with the climate crisis, pandemics, economic inequality, and all kinds of other major problems that humanity faces. So I think that I bring Tamara on. Tamara Lorincz is a PhD candidate at the Basili School for International Affairs. She's a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and the No to NATO Network. Tamara is also a fellow at the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and is involved in the newly formed NATO to Neutrality Working Group of Science for Peace. So first of all, thanks for coming on. And I'll just get right to it. There was this NATO summit in Spain last week. Got a whole lot of media attention, and just talk about NATO and specifically talk about the NATO strategic concept.
So this NATO summit in Madrid was a very important summit for the alliance. In fact, they extended from their normal 2 days to 3 days. So it was June 28th to June 30th. And in the past, Canada would only send, just our prime minister would attend. But this time he brought along our Minister of Defense, Anita Anand, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Melanie Joly. So it really showed a strong, united presence from Canada. And the NATO officials called this summit the most historic, transformative summit in NATO's post-Cold War period, so over the last 30 years. And that's because we saw a new strategic concept come out, the first strategic concept in 12 years. The last time that NATO has had a strategic concept was in 2010. And it also brought out NATO's first climate change and security impact assessment. And we have this new Madrid Declaration. And if you compare and contrast the 2010 strategic concept with this 2022 strategic concept, you will see the stark differences. And one of them is the expansion of NATO outside this transatlantic area into the Indo-Pacific. So the first time that China has been identified by NATO as a threat. And it also talks about Africa and the Middle East. So those two regions, they combined Africa and the Middle East together, and the Indo-Pacific are the distinct differences and really should trouble us. NATO's growing presence in the Pacific off the coast of China is very problematic. At this NATO summit in Madrid, they encouraged and invited the leaders of South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand to attend for the very first time. So it's a show of force, to China. And, China pushed back. If you followed the social media accounts of China during the summit, you can see that they really challenge this very aggressive rhetoric against China during the summit. So, China was pushing back and rejecting the fact that it should be seen by NATO as a threat and as a challenger. And then we should be very concerned that NATO is also identifying the Middle East and Africa as a new region, as a new priority for itself. So right now, NATO has an occupation operation in Iraq, but it's planning on extending its presence in the Middle East. I mean, that's what's very apparent when you read the documents and you listen to what took place. And then, of course, a growing presence in Africa. And one of the things that it says in its strategic concept is that the reason why it's going to be on the continent is because it's trying to challenge China there. And so it sees China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a global development project that many countries are joining because they're in desperate need of universities and public transit and ports and other kind of infrastructure. So it's challenging that. And in fact, the week before the NATO summit, Justin Trudeau and our foreign affairs minister were in Africa and made an announcement for a new Canadian embassy in Rwanda. And Melanie Joly said specifically it was to challenge China. So we have to be really concerned about what NATO's and Canada's intentions are in these two regions that have been suffering for decades from Western militarism and colonialism.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see, like to repeat it. I mean, they really do. They want to basically tag China and Russia as enemies at the same time, and step towards war. I mean, with in China's case, probably 1/5 of humanity right there, and in Russia's case, obviously the biggest landmass. And to imagine doing this at a time when we need to deal with the climate crisis and stuff like that is pretty amazing. I personally, like when they talk about Africa and the Middle East and targeting China, like some people are talking about this now. It's sort of proving that there's always been an expansionist. It's never been a defensive arrangement. I'm of the opinion, if you go back to 1949 and the creation of NATO, when you look at what Lester Pearson, who was the Canadian main player in the creation of the alliance, he was pretty open that he saw NATO as a tool to sort of dominate the world and to bring the former European powers under the U.S. geopolitical umbrella. And then they supported colonialism in Africa throughout the 1950s and stuff like that. So it's the alliance has always been about sort of world domination, but the fact that they're sort of increasingly open about that is quite remarkable. And it's also it's remarkable that the Trudeau government is so aggressive in its support, right? Like you mentioned that there's all the they brought the foreign minister and the defense minister. Well, 10 days earlier, there was the big, the first conference of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Vienna, and I believe no Canadian official was sent to that summit, right, to try to eliminate nuclear weapons. And the reason why, in large part, is because Canada is a member of NATO. So I thought you want to speak to that question.
Oh, yes. So the week before the NATO summit in Vienna was the first meeting of the parties on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And before that really crucial nuclear disarmament meeting, Canadian civil society groups, for 6 months prior, once we knew the dates of that Vienna meeting, we appealed. We sent many letters, emails to the Prime Minister and to Minister Joly to say, please send a delegation to attend and observe this meeting. But the letters weren't answered, and Canada did not send a delegation. Now, some NATO countries like Netherlands and Germany did send a delegation to observe, but that was because those were parliamentary decisions that were forced by the public. So the public put intense pressure on those governments to say, you need to send people to the meeting in Vienna. And you're right, Yves. I mean, it's the reason why Canada did not attend the meeting of the TPNW and why we're not signing and ratifying this important new treaty for nuclear disarmament is because of our membership in NATO. And I think it's also important to talk about what this new strategic concept says about nuclear weapons. So this new concept from NATO, this is the blueprint of the priorities and plans for the alliance. It says very specifically that US nuclear weapons are the ultimate guarantee of the alliance's security, not just nuclear weapons broadly, but US nuclear weapons. And it says that nuclear deterrence is going to be, the prime security doctrine of the alliance. So this nuclear weapons has factored into NATO's strategic outlook, since its inception. And so this is why many of us are saying that, if we're serious about abolishing nuclear weapons, we also have to say we need to abolish NATO. They really go hand in hand. Some nuclear activists, don't see this connection yet, but we really see it as one and the same. The other thing is, it's really important to remember that there are 5 European countries that station US nuclear weapons. And one of the things that Russia has been so upset about is that the United States and NATO are moving missile defenses into Romania and to Poland, to counter Russia's nuclear weapons. So they're changing, this balance of nuclear forces. And then the other thing, it's the US that over the past 20 years that has undermined arms control and disarmament treaties. So abrogating from the anti-ballistic missile treaty 20 years ago, removing itself from the Conventional Forces Treaty and the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and the Open Skies Treaty. So all of this has taken place in the past 20 years. They're moving more nuclear weapons into Europe, missile defense, which is seen as very provocative to Russia. And in fact, Zelensky as well, the Ukrainian president, over the past year has threatened to accept US nuclear weapons. And we're only hearing about Russia's nuclear weapons, but we don't hear about the nuclear provocations against Russia by NATO, and that's really important for us to consider. But this nuclear weapons is another reason why Canada should get out of NATO.
I agree completely, and the Trudeau government. Sorry, we had a kid fall just next, and the Trudeau government's refusal to participate in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is quite a remarkable. On one hand, they say they support the elimination of nuclear weapons. They say they support the international rules-based order. They say they support a feminist foreign policy. The TPNW would advance all of those things, and yet they won't even show up to the meeting, let alone signing it and whatnot. But another issue that came out of a number of things that did come out, announcements sort of surrounding the NATO summit around Canada expanding and extending its mission, NATO mission in Latvia. There's a couple more Canadian naval vessels that have been sent to the North Sea to participate in NATO missions. So now I think there'll be 4 Canadian naval vessels that are participating in NATO missions near Russian territorial waters. There was, and then there's some other announcements of just the expansion of NATO's readiness force all throughout Eastern Europe, but one thing specifically that came out of this summit that was announced that Montreal will host the NATO Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence. And you've done a lot of work on the militarism and the climate crisis. So what are your thoughts on that announcement?
Well, this is Canada helping greenwash NATO's carbon-intensive militarism. Canada is not a leader on climate change. I mean, we have failed to meet every single target under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Canadian carbon emissions continue to go up, and we are just simply aren't a leader. It was last year that Canada suggested that it host this NATO Center of Excellence for Climate and Security. And then at this summit in Madrid is when NATO, formally accepted this proposal. And Anita Anand, at a public forum that was held by at the summit, there was a 2-day public forum, and our defense minister spoke about Canada hosting this Center of Excellence, and she said that it was going to be held in Montreal, and that she spoke about what she plans around greening defense. So talking about trying to electrify tanks and trying to use alternative energy in fighter jets. I mean, but we can't waste any time trying to make weapons more environmentally friendly. We need to stop using the weapons. And the other thing is, if you look at this document that came out, Climate Change and Security Impact Assessment, which articulates NATO's thinking around climate and security, you can see that really what it's about is trying to make NATO soldiers and operations more resilient in the battleground. So they're concerned not about how climate change is impacting populations. They're concerned about intense heat for their soldiers, or access to water for their soldiers out in their operations, or how their weapon systems and vehicles can operate and be forward deployed when they need access to fuel. So it's that kind of thing. It's trying this whole climate and security initiative by Canada for NATO is really about trying to help NATO operate in a more climate challenging environment. They're not trying to reduce their emissions and trying to have a lighter footprint. I mean, if we are serious about the climate crisis, if the Trudeau government were serious about this climate emergency that we're in, they would withdraw from NATO, demilitarize, move all of this money that they're putting into the military and into NATO, and reallocate it into real climate action to help our communities deal with forest fires, floods, intense heat waves that are going to come. So we've got this all wrong. This NATO initiative and this center that Canada is establishing is going to actually make us more insecure in this climate emergency.
Yep. The more is spent on the killing machine, the more insecure we're going to be, and more takes us away from the real security threats. But unfortunately, as you pointed out in a couple of very interesting tweets in the last couple of days, the NDP and the Greens both endorsed recently, I guess last month, the Finland and Sweden joining NATO.
Yeah, so like I said, I've spent, last week carefully and closely following all of the texts and videos coming out of this NATO summit and listening to the 2-day public forum. So this was about maybe 11, 12 hours of video. And this is where you hear, the leaders making announcements. And I heard our defense minister say that Canada has already approved a session for Finland and Sweden to join the alliance. And I thought, when did this happen? So I looked back at the Hansard, and sure enough, the Trudeau government fast-tracked a motion in the House to and was really aggressive, really pushing this. And they limited the parliamentary debate and put pressure on the other political parties to adopt their motion for Canada, accepting Finland and Sweden to join the alliance. And I was reading through the testimony, and I was really shocked and saddened to read the remarks by the NDP Foreign Affairs Minister, Heather McPherson, who spoke for the NDP on this motion, and Elizabeth May of the Green Party. And what they said about this, they were really disingenuous and, quite frankly, dishonest in what they said in their remarks in the House of Commons. They said that Russia was a threat to Sweden and to Finland, and that's absolutely not the case. There's no evidence of that at all. For decades and decades and decades, Russia has had, these have been neutral countries, and they've had friendly relations with the former Soviet Union and with Russia, especially over the past 30 years. So they inflated the threat, and they really portrayed Russia, terribly and dishonestly, and they voted to accept this enlargement, and this is just going to further create tensions with Russia. It's going to cause problems, and they should have voted against the motion. So I was just really troubled by that, and I appeal to people, if they're members of the party, to put pressure on the NDP and the Green Party to change their position on NATO, and to they need to have. They need to challenge what NATO is doing. I just think their positions were really discreditable.
Yeah, it should be noted the CCF, the founding of NATO, the CCF, the predecessor of the NDP, immediately said it supported NATO, and even before members were able to vote on the matter, and over many years they did all kinds of anti-democratic moves to suppress the membership that didn't agree with NATO. And it took almost 20 years before finally peace activists within the NDP were able to get a NDP position calling for Canada out of NATO. And so this has long been a battle within the NDP, but also I think specifically we should be clear that Heather McPherson specifically has taken, I would say, a pretty wildly extremist position on Russia, Ukraine. You also pointed out in a I think also probably when you're doing your research, you came across another parliamentary debate where she attacks Paul Robinson, who's a University of Ottawa professor, I believe an expert on Russia, somebody who actually he participated in a Canadian Foreign Policy Institute event on NATO, and he was quite clearly the sort of the most liberal of the voices that participated in that. So somebody who's I think fairly careful with what he says, And McPherson was really aggressive against him. And also the passage she said at this parliamentary committee thing, she said, I'll just read it out. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To start with, I want to say that I'm deeply appalled by some of the testimony we have heard today and the fact that we have heard that there are bad people on both sides. We are looking at an illegal war and the invasion of a sovereign territory. We are looking at the ways the Russians had gone into Ukraine, despite lying over and over again, has fired on citizens, has very clearly done unspeakable, horrific things. To claim that there are bad people on both sides minimizes the pain that Ukraine is going through. I am appalled by that testimony. You know, I think it's totally fair to say that Russia is the principal, has principal moral responsibility for what's gone on and the bad things, if you want to use that kind of language. But to say there's no nuance here and to say you're appalled by someone, I think Paul Robinson, what he had said is that a couple things. One, that no, there wasn't a genocide taking place. And two, that there was evidence that Ukrainian troops had tortured Russian soldiers that they had captured, which I believe is, you know, a clear statement of fact. But the fact that Heather McPherson would be so offended by saying that there are, you know, bad people on both sides, it's also kind of quite, I think, kind of odd language, very almost sort of juvenile-ish kind of language. But it just speaks to how, you know, there's a refusal to hear anything critical of, you know, NATO's role, NATO expansion's role in precipitating the conflict, Canada's role in the ouster of Yanukovych, president in 2014, Canada's support for basically blocking the implementation of the Minsk Accords. Clearly, all of that contributed to the situation. Doesn't justify what Russia's done, but clearly contributed to what has taken place. And the fact that McPherson just refuses to, you want to hear anything but Russia's bad, Ukraine is good, Canada, presumably also Canada, the US are good, is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so let me add a little bit to that story. So this is the Subcommittee for International Human Rights, and it's a subcommittee under the Committee for Foreign Affairs and International Development. And it was actually a hearing that took place in May, and it was looking into the situation in Ukraine and human rights abuses. So they had a retired prosecutor from the International Criminal Court. They had an international legal expert from York University, and they had Dr. Paul Robinson from the University of Ottawa. He served in the British military, he served in the Canadian military, and he is an expert on military history, and he's also and Russia, and so he gave this testimony to say that not only was there, you know, evidence of, you know, war crimes committed by Russia, but there's evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the Ukrainian security forces. And like you said, and as I posted on Twitter, Heather McPherson, you know, said she was appalled and refused to allow him to elaborate. But it even got worse in that committee. You can watch that entire hearing. It's about an hour long. But the chair of the committee, a liberal, said, well, I would approve for Mr. Robinson to have more time to explain. And immediately Heather McPherson said, no, I refuse to give him any of my time, and I refuse to give him any more time. And then there was a suggestion, you know, let's put it to a vote in committee. And the rest of the committee, the liberals, the conservatives, they all voted against Paul Robinson having any time to explain himself further. And then I sent an email. You know, I was so shocked to listen to this, and I sent an email to the secretary of the committee, and I said, has this ever happened before? And she said, this doesn't happen. I mean, it was really shocking how rudely, Heather McPherson was to an expert witness that was, asked to appear before the committee. And then the rest of the committee, closing ranks and refusing to let him speak any further. And remember, she is the foreign affairs critic. Like, she should be criticizing, she should be asking questions, she should be investigating further what Canada is doing in Ukraine. Instead, she's just completely siding with the Canadian government, what we're doing there, and as well with the very belligerent Ukrainian Canadian Congress. In fact, they brought on an expert witness, the Ukrainian convoy from Montreal, to appear on the committee, and so he challenged all of the expert witnesses. So it was very interesting how how the NDP and the Liberals were maneuvering to constrain the debate, but it represents a broader and bigger problem in Parliament, and that is the refusal by any political party or any politician to really investigate, what's going on in this war in Ukraine, and putting on blinders, refusing to look at what's happening in the Donbass, the Ukrainian security forces. There's evidence of killing, kidnapping, raping, torturing people in the Donbass, and so we need to have an honest parliamentary debate, an honest public debate about what's happening with this war, and then we need to figure out strategies to end it. And maybe I will just add too that we have brought information. We have brought information directly to Heather McPherson, about what's happening in this Ukraine war, and she has ignored it, and she's just aligning with the UCC aggressive position against Russia. And many of us see this as a NATO proxy war in Ukraine, with Ukraine against Russia. And there really needs to be more questions asked. And then most importantly, we need to call for a ceasefire and an end to the war. That's what the Canadian government should be doing. And it's not, and it's just prolonging the suffering by exporting more weapons, something that the NDP and the Greens support.
And McPherson has repeatedly stated that she opposes diplomatic solutions, which is a pretty remarkable situation. So I mean, it really is in our hands. It's about anti-war activism, and I know you wanted to mention just briefly before we hopefully have time for a couple questions. There were mobilizations across the country.
Yeah. So. From June 24th to June 30th, across Canada, we had about 15 rallies in the major cities, from Victoria, British Columbia to Halifax, Nova Scotia. Canadians on the street saying, "Stop the weapons, stop the war, stop NATO." And we were in solidarity with rallies and protests that took place across the United Kingdom and across Europe, during this time of the NATO summit. So we wanted to show that there is Canadian opposition to the alliance. We're calling for Canada to withdraw, and we need to build this movement. It's so critical, because we cannot allow the alliance to implement its new strategic concept. It's going to mean more war and more climate chaos. We need global cooperation. We need global solidarity. We need to abolish NATO and work together on our common challenges, implementing the Paris Agreement and achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. So I'm urging listeners and people to get involved in our movement. We're going to establish a Canada out of NATO campaign, and we also in Science for Peace are going to establish a NATO to neutrality working group, trying to encourage academics and researchers to do the research on challenging NATO.
And I believe there was also thousands, I mean, even to, I believe tens of thousands in Madrid
Yeah,
on the streets against NATO. So
there were 30,000 people on the street in Madrid on Sunday, and it was the largest ever march against NATO in Europe. And there was a very, very heavy police presence. They were trying to stop protesters from having a march. They had, security fences all over. They did their best to try to prevent a protest from taking place, but the people insisted, and there was mass demonstrations, and not just in Madrid, all across Europe. And we need to continue to mobilize together.
So we don't have much time left, but I think we have time for a few questions. People want to raise their hand, and I see that Laurel has her hand raised. Go ahead, Laurel.
Okay, I have 2 points I want to make. Number one, there's another aspect to this thing that's going on with Heather McPherson and the Liberal Party. Russia is winning. It has just taken loose a chance. It's moving on to the rest of the southern Donbass. And my understanding is that there's no doubt that they're going to succeed in fulfilling Putin's intention of cleaning up that part of eastern Ukraine. And as a result of this, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers are actually fleeing. They don't want to fight anymore because they're overwhelmed. And we have a government and other people also saying we need to arm them so that they can fight further. That means that we are willing to sacrifice more Ukrainian soldiers to fight an unwinnable war against the Russians. I think this is morally untenable. And I would like us to bring that point up, that Trudeau and the NDP apparently are encouraging a lot of Ukrainians to sacrifice themselves in a war that is ultimately not winnable. They're not going to make it because the Russians are too strong. That's one thing I wanted to say. The second thing was that this new initiative of NATO costs money. And I'm not sure that they're going to be able to pull it off, because there was an Angus Reid poll that said that only 48% of Canadians wanted to send weapons to Ukraine. 79% or 75% wanted to send humanitarian aid. Plus, we have inflation at almost 8%. And there's a lot of resistance, I believe, right now to spending money on stuff that does not actually help Canadians. I'll finish there. That's all I want to say. Just those 2 points.
Can I quickly respond to what Laurel said? The week before the NATO summit, Chrystia Freeland was at the Munk School of Public Policy introducing Zelensky as he was speaking to Canadian students. And in that address, our Deputy Prime Minister said that Canada was the second largest donor to Ukraine. We've already sent $1.5 billion right to the coffers of Ukraine. And we've about $1 billion worth of military aid and weapons. And she said in her speech that, we are going to continue to send money and continue to send weapons because we are going to defeat Russia. We are going to be there as long as it takes. And that's this language of trying to defeat Russia and to prolong this conflict for as long as it takes was repeated throughout the NATO summit. So we really need to stop this war. And I want to encourage people to make this summer a summer of disruption, because our members of parliament are going to be at picnics and barbecues. And I want to encourage you to stand with your signs, stop the war, stop the weapons, stop NATO, and then let us know the actions that you've taken, because we really need to stop this war, friends.
As I mentioned last week, Tamara disrupted that event where Freeland was introducing Zelensky, or at least a satellite showing of it. And I should also mention that Laurel was part of the disruption of Freeland on Tuesday. I do think we should be a little bit cautious with some of the language around clearing out the Donbass, but because I do think that, you know, while I have sympathy for Russia's perspective with regards to NATO expansion and NATO aggressiveness, I do think that they are meting out a whole lot of violence, and there's a lot of horrors being suffered. But so Yuri, go ahead.
Thanks, Yves, and great to have you on here tomorrow. When you were in Spain at the anti-NATO, protesting with all the comrades there, what has been the perspective of all of the different people who are protesting against Spain being part of NATO, or Holland being a part of NATO, or Luxembourg and whatnot? Because I mean, even though I only speak English, I can definitely say that this war in Ukraine, there is just no room whatsoever to have any kind of objective conversation on all things Russia, all things Ukraine, and so I just wanted your perspective on that. And also, and while we are talking about how awful the NDP and the Greens are in Canada, I could also say, like, every center left to alternative left party, from Podemos to Syriza to the Greens in Germany, they're all just like rah pro NATO, and we need to green up our militaries and so forth. So I'm curious, your perspective on that, and this also kind of goes back to Yves' book about left-right, all these so-called leftists marching to their country's imperial beats.
Well, just quickly, I wasn't in Madrid, but I was following it closely, and I am part of the NATO network, which helped organize the big rally and the big conference in Madrid, and I was involved with the pre-planning by Zoom, and what you expressed is what's happening in Europe. It is very difficult for them to call for their countries to withdraw from NATO, because of this war in Ukraine. But I think if you read the documents, I really encourage you to read this new strategic concept. And I think that if people read it, they'll realize that there's no way we can follow this plan for the future. It just will lead to a greater desperation, devastation, and demise. And so, friends, we know we are right when we make this call. NATO needs to be abolished, and so we just need to gird ourselves here. We need to have courage in the face of in these trying times to say that, to make that case. So we need to continue to do that, and I just encourage you to read the strategic concept, and then we need to challenge it and work together on a campaign for NATO's abolition.
And I just want to reiterate the point that Tamara made about it is the summer season, and a lot of the politicians are going to be around doing barbecues and doing public events, and there's really are lots of opportunities, not even too aggressive a fashion, of kind of bringing some of these questions up, right? Literally just having a sign and standing next to the politician while they're speaking with the sign, especially if there's cameras around, and getting Canada out of NATO, or negotiations, not more weapons, or I don't know what the exact slogan would be. Those opportunities there, and also to or to be a bit more disruptive. So I do invite people to seek out where their local politicians are on these in coming weeks and months. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Hi. Important information that you are disseminating each week. It's really, really very important and appreciated. Now, I know there was a demonstration. Oh, first,
So you're cutting out a little bit. Here, maybe we'll go to Sandhu and then come back to you. Okay?
can you hear me?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I say I hope you can send that you make available a recording of these conversations this tonight, for instance, because I want to send it out to some of my friends. That's first. Secondly, I tried to go to a demonstration this past week, but could not find any information on my email or on Facebook. I'm not part of Twitter or whatever else there is in the media. Just can't be part of everything. So I'm just saying it's not made available. This information about the demonstrations are not made widely available, and so they probably
you cut out at the end. So but yes, the recording of this will be, as previous ones, is available at my YouTube channel. So just Yves Engler. I forget the exact. You have to have all the numbers, but if you punch in Yves Engler at YouTube, it comes up. Hopefully, we post it later tonight. And now I agree with you with regards to I think that the anti-war movement is sort of weak in its organizational structure at the moment. There was announcements of the mobilizations, but yeah, I think that there probably needs to be a better job done of getting that in a more kind of coordinated way for people who aren't on Twitter, right? It was circulating on Twitter, and I think it was circulating on Facebook. Yeah. Go ahead, Tamara.
I put in the chat a link to the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network, the website. Check it out. I'd also encourage you to join our email list, to join the email list of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, because we put the actions there. And the peace movement in Canada does have limited capacity. We don't get funding from weapons manufacturers like the NATO Association of Canada does, and the federal government gives tons of money to pro-military, pro-NATO think tanks, and we're not getting those resources. So we do have limited capacity, but there are places for you to follow us, and I encourage you to join the email list.
Go ahead, Sandhu.
Thanks, Eve. I just have just 2 points, and then I would like to hear your perspective on that. First one is that it appears to me that the Canadian position, in particular the NDP and even some of the other left wing perspectives, is less about NATO as it is more targeted towards the domestic Ukrainian Canadian audience. We have the third largest population of Ukrainians after Ukraine and Russia in the world. And particularly in the prairies and whatnot, I imagine that Heather McPherson has to, do something to that community per se. So that's one thing. That, in other words, who are these people talking to these politicians when they, have their gung ho rhetoric against Russia, for instance. And the second one is that. One of the things that could possibly be used over the summer, as everybody's saying, is that the business case, if you will, or the storyline on why we are so heavily invested in Ukraine outside of the domestic audience appears to me that it hasn't been very well told. There certainly is no coherence on why are we there, why are we spending so much money, other than the kind of sort of broad strokes around, defending democracy and yada, yada, yada. So that's also something that can be punched through. So anyway, those are 2 points, and I wonder what are your thoughts on that, and particularly the first point of vis-a-vis the domestic audience.
Well, I think that clearly Heather McPherson, I mean, she's in Edmonton, and Edmonton's, a hub of hardline Ukrainian nationalist kind of thinking, right? That's where the second Ukrainian studies program ever was set up in 1976 at the University of Alberta. And it was set up with very politicized intentions to push a certain perspective of Ukraine's history. And so that there's no doubt that impacts, I would think, significantly to understand Heather McPherson's position, that's an important component. I think that you do have to look at this more broadly. I mean, if you take most other issues, the NDP is, supporting military expansion. The NDP supported the bombing of Libya in 2011. There's a long history that this fits in with. Can't be explained just by the organized Ukrainian community in this country. That is a factor. I think it is an important factor too. But like one way to look at this is to look at the biggest Ukrainian community in the world is in Russia, right, or diaspora, right? But in the Ukrainian community in Russia doesn't have the same political disposition, partly because the political culture in which they're operating in is a different type of political culture. It's sort of diametrically opposed to the pro-NATO sort of let's get aggressive with the Soviet Union, kind of all that history that's part of Canada's political culture. So yeah, the difference. I also think there have to be like one of the explanations for all of why Canada can take such a belligerent position alongside the U.S. is we have quite little at stake compared to countries like Germany. There's a story about economic pain that Germany's feeling over the increased natural gas prices. Right? They have way greater economic relations with Russia than Canada does. So Canada has this. We're very distant, so it makes it a lot easier to take this really aggressive position without too much cost. So everything from Canada being a founding nation, a founding member of NATO, and the importance of that to the Ukrainian Canadian community, to the distance is part of the factors. Go ahead, Tamara, and then.
So you're right that Canada has a very large Ukrainian diaspora here. I was in Edmonton a couple of months ago, and I met with some of the Ukrainian community there. And you wouldn't know this by looking at mainstream media in this country, but the Ukrainian community is actually divided. There's the extreme right-wing belligerent Ukrainian Canadian Congress, the UCC, but there's also the Association of United Ukrainians, the AUUC. And the federal government, Chrystia Freeland in particular, has been funding and supporting the UCC against the AUUC. And so, for instance, in Edmonton, the UCC has, a big fancy building, and the AUC's building, it's struggling to keep it afloat. The other thing that there are a lot of the Ukrainian Canadians in this country that are aligned with the UCC have corporate interests in Ukraine. In 2019, Canada hosted the Ukraine Economic Reform Conference in Toronto, and Zelensky was there. And if you look at the agenda, if you look at the participants, what came out of that reform conference, you can see the intense corporate interests that Canada has in Ukraine around, gas and minerals and land and, and services. And then there's not just the corporate interests in Ukraine, but also the corporate interests in Russia. I mean, Russia's a huge country, and there's no doubt in my mind that NATO wants to balkanize Russia like it did to the former Yugoslavia as a way to divide and control and to access Russia's resources, because Russia does have, a lot of oil and gas and mineral wealth. This is what makes it, a great power. And this is something that the United States, the capitalists and the militarists of the West want to have access to. So, there's that aspect of it as well. And, you always have to think that NATO is that military muscle of Western domination and capitalism. NATO paves the way.
Well, on that note, that was a great end to this session. I thank Tamara for participating, and of course everyone for joining us. And have a good night, and hope to see people next week.